Good morning and welcome everyone to Net Zero Challenge Accepted. I'm Jimmy Delargy and I'm pleased to be hosting this Mid-Ulster Enterprise Week event. Understandably, we've been preoccupied in recent months with the price of energy, perhaps less so with its impact on the environment. But while energy costs are set to remain a concern, the truth is that global warming is by far the bigger threat to the well-being of homes and businesses. To help neutralise that danger, Northern Ireland has signed up for the drive to achieve net zero. The question is then, how should business change to achieve that end? We have two speakers to help provide answers. They are Mareanne Bradley, Group Marketing Manager at the specialist Joinery Group, and Stephen Agnew, Director, RenewableNI. Bernadette Convery of NI was also due to join us, but unfortunately she has become unwell and is not available. You're all very welcome. I want to start and hopefully continue on a positive note. Are we confident that Northern Ireland has enough natural resources to attain net zero? And has business the appetite to make the changes needed to deliver that end? Stephen, we famously have little in the way of fossil fuel deposits on this island. How blessed are we with green energy resources?
The good news is this is one of the best places in Europe for wind, particularly. So along with the Republic of Ireland, Scotland and Denmark, we're kind of leading the league tables in terms of wind resource. It's maybe not so positive in terms of solar, but there's enough here that the people still invest and that will form back up. But at the minute it's about 85% of our renewable capacity is wind, and you know, probably about 40% of our overall generation. So, you know, we've a number of challenges. Jamie, you've heard me talk about them, I'm sure, many a times, but people are still investing in Northern Ireland because the wind resource is so good. So we have that advantage. We just need our policymakers to build on that advantage, I suppose, and you know, make this a great place to invest again.
Mareanne, your company has embraced the challenge of decarbonisation. What inspired it to start and continue on this path?
I suppose what inspired it to start, our founder and chairman, John Bosco, is always keen on giving back, whether that's to the environment, to the community. And he started giving back, I suppose, way back in the 1990s, before net zero or sustainability were real buzzwords about. So what he started was investing, I suppose, in forestry. We're a joinery manufacturing business first and foremost. So we do use a lot of wood. So again, we looked at what ways we could give back to the environment, and that was investing in forestry, that is planting trees every year. And this has really become an annual thing. We work with the Woodland Trust and with our apprentices, and we believe they're the lifeblood of the company. And from little acorns, mighty oaks grow. So we take them out each year and we plant between 1,000 and 2,000 trees. But really, it's been incremental steps over time, and it's worked with the business either financially at the time on what we could do. So again, it's small steps, not one big step, but we started with the forestry and the Woodland Trust, and then we moved into our wood waste burners. And I suppose the benefits of them is that they can heat the factory, they can power the machinery. And that was in 2003. And then in 2016, we invested in our solar panel system, and that is on the roof of our factory. That probably gives about 50% of the electricity that we use here, and the other 50% comes from renewable sources. Our factory grew, and what we did was we invested in a second, bigger wood waste burner. And I suppose it's just been other smaller steps, the introduction to low emission vehicles, the introduction to bee farming, would you believe, and the introduction to just different small steps at a time, incremental with what work with the business.
Right, that sounds really interesting and really encouraging. You know, you have a short video illustrating the progress made at the Specialist Joinery Group. Maybe we can see it now.
Brilliant.
Welcome to our world. Here at Specialist, the environment and social value are at the centre of everything we do. At Specialist, we have invested in over 100 acres of forestry in County Fermanagh. Alongside this, we have made donations to the Woodland Trust. Another key part of Specialist Group's environmental strategy is our use of a biomass boiler. The boiler is fuelled by waste materials from our production operations and heats Specialist HQ. We also have a heat recovery system. Specialist Group has recently added bee farming to our sustainability actions. Bees make a great contribution to the world around us. All our energy comes from renewable sources, 50% from our solar panel system, and the remaining 50% from locally generated green electricity. We operate a zero waste to landfill policy and work with accredited waste carriers. We also operate a lean manufacturing system, optimised material usage, and on-site we use a pallet take-back scheme and use of recycled packaging. Specialist is both FSC and PEFC certified, and 100% of projects delivered by Specialist use sustainably sourced timber. We have our own fleet and operate a forest policy with excellence in transport management, fuel consumption and loading. At Specialist Group, health and well-being of our staff is a key priority. We have qualified coaches to support the well-being of our staff. We utilise occupational health practitioners and have mental health first aiders, both in the factory and on site. We have key health awareness days throughout the year and fun team bonding sessions. Specialist Group is committed to promoting an organisational culture which embraces diversity and promotes equality of opportunity. We enjoy supporting the communities around us and the communities we operate in.
Excellent video there. Mareanne, there's clearly a lot of investment there in green resources and decarbonisation. Of itself, has that brought in extra business?
I think it certainly has helped. Again, a lot of our custom is in London, and we do a lot of work in the UK, London, Manchester, Scotland. And the Irish Sea can seem like a barrier. It seems unsustainable. People just assume, we use so much energy, I suppose, getting forwards and backwards to London. So we really need to up what we do sustainably here in our manufacturing facility and prove that our sustainability credentials. So again, we find for every job we go for, every bid we're putting in, we have sustainability questionnaires to fill in. And we really have to make sure that we fulfill all these requirements. So again, we have invested incremental over time, but every small bit makes a difference.
I think people looking at what you're doing are wondering, has that investment meant an increase in the prices you would otherwise have had to charge?
It probably is. We are a price premium. We do high quality joinery, so it probably is reflected in the cost. It would be reflected in certainly in our overhead rate when we are pricing for jobs. And again, it has to because you're not going to be efficient as a company or make money if it isn't, I suppose.
I want to investigate and explore some of those things that you've been talking about there. But for the moment, I'll just park it and we'll talk to Stephen. Stephen, I think we know in general what RenewableNI does, but can you tell us a little bit more about the organisation?
Will do. I've just got some slides to share. So fingers crossed. It's always these things work. There we go. Yeah. Everybody saying that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so RenewableNI, we're the trade association for the renewable electricity industry in Northern Ireland. Our members are typically engaged in wind, solar, tidal and battery storage projects. I suppose in the spirit of Good Friday Agreement, they always bring politics into everything. We work north, south, east, west. So we've two parent associations, Renewable UK and Wind Energy Ireland, and that gives us, I suppose, insight and influence across these islands. These are our members, and you can see maybe from the companies you recognise, we have large and small scale developers, onshore and offshore, wind, solar, and battery storage, as well as sort of those across the supply chain. So a lot of lawyers, planning consultants, environmental consultants, etc. Basically, if you're involved in renewable electricity, you know, we try to get you involved in RenewableNI. These are just some of our member forums that we run. Essentially, we bring the industry together, we discuss the common problems and ideally the solutions we wish to propose to government. So you can kind of see we look at markets, grid planning, and then different technologies such as offshore PV, small scale, and then how we communicate as an industry. I thought it might just be of interest to a kind of Mid-Ulster audience what we contribute in terms of the Mid-Ulster area as an industry. So these figures are for onshore wind alone. Onshore wind developers or generators are currently contributing £4.1 million in rates to the local council. That could increase to 5.3 million based on the projects that are in the pipeline. These figures come from a report we commissioned KPMG to do on our behalf. So they I suppose they're well evidenced, and the report is called Powering the Green Economy and is on the RenewableNI website if people want to learn more. And then just in terms of the local community, so large-scale renewable projects typically will set up a community benefit fund. And again, you can see Mid-Ulster is top in the charts in terms of the contribution we make in the council area. So currently £660,000 per year. And again, you know, as we move forward to 2030, we've got an 80% renewables target. So, you know, that could increase significantly if we move. We're currently sort of sitting between 40 and 50%, 47% at the last kind of yearly average. But we're looking to get the 80% by 2030. So that'll mean more in rates, more in community benefits for the areas outlined here. So that's really it from me in terms of the introduction, and there's my contact details should anyone wish to get in touch.
You've mentioned there about the target for renewable electricity by 2030, but is the industry, you think, geared up to expand to meet that target?
The investment is sitting ready and waiting. So to get to 80% in terms of onshore wind, we need an extra sort of roughly 1.1 gigawatt. To put that into context, our total renewables at the minute are 1.7 gigawatts. So it almost wind alone nearly needs to double the renewable electricity output. And as I say, we'll get a contribution, maybe 900 megawatts from solar. That investment is already in the pipeline, in the planning system or in pre-planning. We already have that level of project, I suppose, and we want to stay positive, but the potential barriers to that will be a planning system that takes far too long to approve planning applications. So, for example, it's about 1.5 years to get a wind farm through planning in the Republic of Ireland. It's typically 3 to 5 years in Northern Ireland. So, you know, we need to reduce those timelines if we're going to meet the target. The other issue is we don't have a market support in Northern Ireland at the minute. So the UK has contracts for difference. Republic of Ireland has a RES scheme. What they do, and I'll not go into a great amount of detail, but they essentially offer generators a fixed price so that they can predict. And that's, I suppose, a benefit to both generator and consumer, because you know for 15 years ahead of time how much that electricity is going across. And that's never more relevant than now when we've seen a massive strike price. If you're in one of those contracts, you don't get an increase in your price. You know, that you've provided a guarantee to the consumer that you'll deliver at a certain cost. So those are the types of things we need in Northern Ireland, as well as investment in the grid. But that to be fair, has to date happened as we've built out new renewables, we've built out the grid, and we've managed to do it in a way that we still overall save the consumer money.
Thanks, Stephen. Look, if any of you listening have questions for Stephen or for Mareanne, you can use the Q&A function on your screens there to put those questions to me, and I'll relay them then to our panelists. Now, Bernadette Convery, as I mentioned at the start, is unable to join us, but she was going to talk about the work of NI. The organisation has help available for businesses within Northern Ireland to tackle decarbonisation. They have technical consultancy support, which is open to all businesses with a combined annual energy and resource spend of £30,000 or more to look at any energy or resource related concerns they may have. This could be in the form of an energy audit, carbon footprinting exercise, renewable energy feasibility study, or other. Now, NI has applied this with a case study video which focuses on Deli Lights, the maker of sandwiches, wraps, and salads, which is an example of a company which has used NI support in their decarbonisation journey. I think we're going to see that video now.
At Deli Lights, we are an artisan food producer based in Warrenpoint, County Down, and we make delicious and innovative food-to-go products for convenience, retail and hospitality sectors globally. It's extremely important that we reduce the impact of our business on the environment. So we've set ourselves some ambitious targets, which we are achieving at the moment. First of all, at the start of 2021, we launched a carbon neutral plant-based range, and then we are also targeted to reduce our carbon emissions by 20% by the end of the year, and we're well ahead with that.
We've been working with Gillian Stewart and the rest of the NI energy and resource efficiency team now for a number of years. We found their advice to be invaluable, and it has helped give us direction in the way that we've wanted to improve how we act and how we are as a sustainable business. Two of the main projects that we worked on with the NI team were water management and carbon footprint assessment. The water management project helped us identify where our biggest users of water were and how we could reduce those. And that was typically in hygiene operations, where we reduced our water by around 50%. In our carbon footprint assessment, that helped us target our biggest contributors to our carbon footprint, which were our vans and our electricity usage. We've moved over quite a lot of our fleet over to electric. Our company cars for the senior team and for our sales team have all gone electric already.
We've got some brilliant electric charging points at the front of the business. We've got our solar panels on top. Then we have our heat recovery system for our freezer, which converts excess heat into hot water for the site. So that's something that you won't visibly see, but is in action, and it's increasing our sustainability.
Another way in which has benefited the business is through awards as well. So just this year, we won the British Sandwich Association Manufacturer of the Year and came highly commended in the Environmental Award. So that really put us on the map for sustainability and helped us gain new business.
I think you can get bogged down in, if you haven't done anything, there seems to be so much that has to be done, but it's not thinking like that. It's making those small incremental steps that will lead you on your sustainability journey. So it might even be as simple as creating a new policy about turning off your lights, increasing the energy efficiency of that, changing your light bulbs, those little things, or changing your electricity tariff. That might be something that you could also do.
The advice I would give is to listen and engage. Listen to NI and engage with them where you can. Listen to your customers, what they have to say, and listen to your colleagues because they know your business best. Secondly is to plan. Understand what you need to do as a business, create smart objectives in both the long term and the short term. And finally is to execute on those objectives, and you can do that best by creating an environmental team within your business of environmental champions from each department.
We were passionate about food, but we're also passionate about the planet. And I think we need to really, it's environmental and sustainability issues are everywhere now, and we don't want to be part of the problem, we want to be part of the solution.
Some useful advice there, and the NI would welcome your approaches there. So Mareanne, I just want to turn to you at this point. You've installed solar panels at your in your company. Now, what would be the payback time for them? Would you have an idea of that?
I would have to check that. I wouldn't have an answer from the top of my head, so apologies, Jimmy, I should have had that. But I certainly think we've installed them back in 2016. So I would hope that we would have had payback by now, but I can certainly get that answer for you. But I know at home we've installed solar panels in our house at home, and we certainly have found that we've got payback. So solar panels is a really good way to, I suppose, to start the journey. Particularly, you can do that domestically and you can do it with businesses also. But we've certainly found we installed them at home about 6 years ago, and we found that they have already paid back.
Excellent, excellent. Battery storage would help you at the company to make best use of the power that you're getting from your solar panels. Now, I assume that you don't have battery storage installed at this point. Is that something you're considering?
It certainly is. We always are looking at what we can do better and what we can do next. So we are looking at certainly the next sustainability steps for us at Specialist, and battery storage is one of them. So we have been in talks with a local Northern Ireland company that does battery storage, and we're sort of investigating that model with other different sustainability steps, such as electric vehicles, wind power as well, and just looking at what steps we can do next. But battery storage is certainly coming up close to the top of what we're looking at.
Well, those investments like battery storage or electrifying your fleet, that's a lot of money, I would assume, or a significant amount of money. Would you need government support to be able to take that step?
Certainly, I do think that government support would be very welcome to all businesses, and that is so we don't have to increase the prices of our products to make us, I suppose, unsustainable in the marketplace. So government support to help all businesses achieve any sustainability goals is certainly very, very welcome.
Stephen, if I could turn to you, and you've sort of touched on some of this already, which is, what does the renewable industry need to further develop? I mean, I think, I know you mentioned the streamlining of the planning process and the time it takes to get a project through planning. Realistically, what time scale would you like to see to being totally realistic about it, to get a wind farm through from sort of start to on site? I mean, what would be reasonable, do you think?
Sure. So we obviously had the publication of the energy strategy roughly this time last year, and we've had an action plan, but there's still a feeling that it hasn't really got going, and the action plans are coming on an annual basis, which is something we've welcomed, because you're at least seeing the progress ahead of time. So we look forward to the publication of the 2023 action plan, which will hopefully move some things along. But in terms of those planning timelines, I mean, just to give maybe people an example, like, why does it take so long in Northern Ireland compared to other regions? Every planning application, certainly a significant planning application, has to go to statutory consultees for feedback. One of those consultees is the Natural Environment Division. They're supposed to respond within 3 weeks, and it's currently taken on a wind farm application 11 to 12 months. That's a big gap from what you've said you'll do to what you are doing. But the problem is there's one person working on those applications. That needs to increase. We need to put resource into it. We believe if we fund the planning system, if we resource it properly, that we should see a turnover of these applications within a year. You know, that's, as I say, they've already reached 18 months in the Republic of Ireland, and they're aiming for that kind of 1 year target. So that's where we'd like to get to. But even at the minute, as a first step, if we could just meet the timelines that are sort of outlined by the planning system, and start to actually deliver what the planning system says it should do, that would really bring it forward. I mean, medium term, we'd like to see a prioritization of green infrastructure projects, not just wind and solar, but the likes of the infrastructure, the grid investment that needs to go with it. And I think there are increasing calls for that. We're in a climate emergency. We've seen with COVID that when government acts like there's emergency, it can actually do things quickly. We're not seeing that, and I've been told this from fairly senior civil servants. There isn't the same type of urgency over climate that we've seen with COVID. That's where we need to get to, because we want to stay positive, but in we're at 1.1 degree of warming. We've seen this summer 55,000 excess deaths across Europe due to the heat. Now that's in a relatively temperate region of the planet. So climate change is already having an impact. And, it's very much my view that we need almost the Prime Minister coming out at the podium going, here's how many climate deaths there's been this year, here's what we're doing about it, and giving that update to the public, because I don't think people realize just how devastating an impact climate change is already having. And we're predicted at the minute we're heading towards 2.8 degrees of warming. We're at 1.1. It's already causing devastation. So we have to bring that 2.8 figure down to be positive. When I started on climate campaigning, the projections were we were heading towards 5 degrees of warming. So we've made fantastic progress. We know we can do it. We have the technologies. We have the know-how. We just now need the urgency to move these things faster.
I think everybody, I'm sure you've met with this question or encountered this question umpteen times, but people are, do worry that if we rely more and more on wind farms and solar, when we might get to the point where there isn't sufficient fossil fuel backup to ensure that the lights would stay on. Now, what do you feel about that? I mean, in the sense that, yeah, I mean, just because you build another wind farm doesn't necessarily mean that a power station has to shut down. But if they're not making money,
yeah.
And they may just say, look, we can't afford to stay here. So people are, there is this question that it's sort of, could we get to a situation where, yes, for the most of the time, because we have a very windy climate, and especially if we put these wind turbines out to sea, the offshore, you're getting a better result, and you're getting higher capacity factors. But what is your response to that question, that we could leave ourselves exposed if we rely too much on renewables?
Yeah, so it's worth saying renewables aren't an end in themselves, as you've alluded to. If you're just upping the amount of renewables, but not reducing the amount of fossil fuels, then you're still going to have the carbon impact. But equally, we can't reduce the fossil fuels unless we can guarantee security of supply. So we published a report, I think in June last year, called Achieving Zero. And it looked at what a zero carbon power system. It was a part of an all-island study, but the Achieving Zero, I suppose, facing part of it was a zero carbon power system in the island, in Northern Ireland. And what it said, we've got the 80% target for 2030. But what it said, going forward to fully zero carbon, we still actually have all the technology we need. We know now it's all been invented. We don't need to invent something new to go fully zero carbon. So to make up that, I suppose, backstop, instead of using fossil fuels, there's two possible ways we can go, and it'll probably be a combination of both. One is long duration battery storage. So you've already alluded that we have what's known as fast response battery storage. It maybe gives you a half an hour of coverage, but there's technology out there that can provide up to 100 hours of storage capacity. So the technology's there. What there isn't yet is a market for that. So we need to find a way of making that financially viable. The other side is hydrogen. We can produce hydrogen through electrolysis using renewables by essentially splitting water into its two component parts of hydrogen and oxygen. And we can retrofit their pathway. Say Baringa, who produced the report for us, would say we currently have 3 gas-fired power stations at the minute in Northern Ireland. We can probably reduce that to 1, but have that retrofitted to burn hydrogen. So there's the emissions of a hydrogen power plant would be water. So that's something we can manage a lot better than the carbon and methane emissions we see at the minute. So their key message was we know now how to do it. you know, we just need to take those iterative steps to get us there.
Mareanne, we have a question here, which is addressing the what you can do in small steps to try, before you take those bigger ones, to try and reduce your carbon footprint. And the deli lights mentioned, I think in the course of the video, it mentioned about switching off lights, which is all very sensible. What would you say as being, the sort of things that can be done that would help a business reduce their costs and reduce their carbon footprint?
Again, this is probably a good process that we're going through in Specialist at the minute, because as well as trying to become more sustainable, we're trying to be leaner as a business also. So we're bringing in the lean philosophy, and some of the things we've done is not only just switching off the lights, having the lights on a timer, so they're motion censored, so if nobody's in the room, the lights are off. So in case anybody forgets to turn off the light switch, the light switch go off themselves on a set timer. We've also, I suppose, looked at a traffic light system, which is red, green, and this is on electrical appliances. So we have a red sticker on appliances that can never be turned off, such as the fridge and things like that can't be turned off. But certainly we try to encourage all our staff to turn off the computers when not needed to. So anything that is green, please turn it off every evening when you're not using it. And I suppose that saves a bit of electricity because we don't have the devices on standby. Another aspect we did look at, and particularly with our machine shop, which uses a lot of energy, is looking at the start and finish times, and particularly whenever the energy tariffs aren't as expensive. So we find with the machine shop, we start the shift slightly earlier. So previously the shift was 7 o'clock to 4:30, and we've changed that to 6 o'clock to 3:30. And again, our team are very welcome to coming in earlier, and it is it's just saving that electricity power when it is at a price premium.
At this point, people might be wondering, do I really need to do this? To make changes, to invest, to decarbonize my operations, and they're thinking, I wonder about the cost of it. And I want you to sort of look into the future and say, is it something in relatively soon will not be just an option for you or something that you're been invited to do, but something that will be essential to win contracts? Maybe we've already reached that point, but what's your estimation of the situation as it is and what it's likely to turn out to be in due course as we move towards net zero?
Well, I know for us in the construction industry, it is certainly highly important. Whenever we're putting a bid for a project, we're getting scored. Previously, it would have been scored on price, quality and team possibly, but now the price, certainly the sustainability, diversity and inclusion is really becoming increasingly important. And for some of our main customers, unless we can answer sustainability questionnaires, we will not get the job. We will just not get even on the tender list. So again, it's becoming increasingly important for ourselves because we're not going to win work if we're not sustainable. We're not a lot of our contractors, they have set goals for when they want to become net zero, but they need their supply chain to be matching those goals. And if the supply chain aren't matching them, they're going to be taken off the supply chain. So it's really, really important for us to stay on the supply chain for all of the top contractors that we do work for. So really, we need to match their expectations and their goals.
Is this just for the clients who are in the public sector, or is this beginning to spread out beyond the public sector, or maybe it already has to those in the private sector? In other words, that it's not an optional extra, but it's just an essential part of it, will become an essential part of your offering.
Certainly, for us, it's already in the private sector. There is set goals, I suppose, for contracts, whether that is a BREEAM accreditation they're going for, whether it is a SCA Gold or LEED accreditation. So lots of the projects that are starting, they have set accreditations that they want to reach with the building. So it has stretched way beyond public, and it is private now. So yes, that definitely is coming that way.
Yeah. I'm not sure how many employees you have in RenewableNI, Stephen, but you may have an insight into this, and it's a question that's come up here, which is how do you encourage employees to cycle or take public transport to work? Is it something that something that an organization can do usefully in that direction? Maybe I'll ask you that, Mareanne, the same question about that. But Stephen, have you got an insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it's, Mareanne's outlined really well sort of the business incentives for moving this. And I think, we need to come at this from all sides. So I think that's where we need government support for people to shift to more sustainable modes of transport. I think, certainly in terms of public transport, the evidence is it's not so much about price, although that's important. It's about the reliability and frequency of service. So we've seen with the glider in Belfast, the huge take up because it comes typically every 7 minutes, or certainly during peak periods. So people just know they can step out and get a glider. Whereas if I miss my bus, I'm going to be waiting for another hour, potentially in the rain, that incentivizes use the car. So I think that's where we need to support coming, both it's always carrot and stick with these things, but the drivers should change for that regard. But obviously the big factor for us as an organization has been working from home, and the improvements, the likes of Zoom and Teams. We don't travel into the office unless we need to. Now there's a wee bit of I suppose competing priorities. So you'll see the likes of Belfast Chamber trying to get people back in to the office, but I'm probably more at the end of facilitate staff to work from home and only come into the office when needed. So as I say, there's a bit of twin priorities there, but certainly we as an organisation promote working from home. Our members are based across these islands, so it doesn't make sense for us to have a lot of in-person meetings. We, of course, as a team, you need to get together, you need to brainstorm and do all that. But if it's not necessary, if it can be done by teams, it probably suits the staff in terms of their work-life balance. And it obviously suits the climate to not having people traveling so much.
Mareanne, can I just sort of slightly turn this question in this direction, which is the same question but in a slightly different direction, which is, this has come up as a query. I mean, do the way that your employees and the company come to work, in other words, if they're coming in their petrol and diesel cars, does that affect your carbon footprint, or what you might have to put down on say, let's say when you're tendering for something, or is it irrelevant? Let's say would it be a positive if everybody came to the company in an electric car, in a sense of you winning business? Do you know if that issue is relevant in the sense? Obviously it's relevant in terms of Northern Ireland reaching net zero, but for the company, does it matter when you're bidding whether people come, what form of transport your employees come to work, not in the transport they would use while at work? What's the situation there?
Again, not at the minute, Jamie, but it will be something that certainly will come in the future when our clients are reaching close to their net zero goals. At the minute, it is solely on, I suppose, how energy efficient our factory is, all our materials, to, I suppose, where they are. We have to look at VOCs, we have to look at our woods, to where they come from, how far they travel. But certainly it's an exercise that we are starting to look at is our carbon emissions that we produce as a factory. And we are starting to look at the vehicles everybody drives, how many miles they drive to and from work. And it is something that we hope in 2 years' time that we'll be able to give all that data to our customers when we are doing a bid. At the minute, we don't have to declare it, but I know that it's fast approaching, and that's why we're starting the exercise into looking at, I suppose, our carbon emissions that we release.
Stephen, I think you mentioned, you absolutely did mention a sort of barrier to progress is the planning system. Are there any other issues that you would see that need to be overcome? Maybe even our attitude. Is Northern Ireland yet, in your view, adopting the appropriate response to the threat of climate change, and are people embracing the notion of the change because it's for their good, and it's certainly for the good of the world? But are there any other, if that's not a problem, are there any other barriers you see in the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most encouraging things I've heard recently from our members is they feel the level of community opposition to renewable projects is reducing. Because I remember one of the things that probably scared me most in this role was, I heard this from a number of people, but including our chief planner. There's this idea that communities had a veto in net zero. Basically, if communities say, no, we're not going there, you can't. We do live in a democracy, and thankfully we do. So you can't run roughshod over communities. You have to bring communities with you. But the evidence is that's improving, and already. I think these are 20 from 2018, but BEIS, the UK government department, did a public attitudes tracker, and there was 85% support for renewables in Northern Ireland. That was the highest region of any in the UK. So we're already starting from a good base, and the evidence is that the communities are starting to come on board. I mentioned before the kind of market mechanism. We are seeing investment in renewables. So we had essentially a 5-year policy vacuum because we met our 2020 target early, which was for 40% renewables. We probably met it in about 2018. There was almost an attitude from government, well, we don't need to do more, we're going to hit 40%. And that was almost seen as the end game, whereas there were others like myself campaigning that no, this was only a step on the journey towards sort of 100% renewables, or certainly fully zero carbon. So we had this 5-year policy gap. We didn't develop any new large-scale renewables for 3 years. And even now that we're starting to see new projects connect, not at the scale and pace that we need. So that's the next step. I mentioned planning. We absolutely need to go further, faster. But we also need this kind of price guarantee, I suppose. And the recent price rises really have helped us as an industry, this idea, because while we always said it was a protection for consumers as much for generators, the feeling was, no, this is just another subsidy. You had subsidy in the past, you still need subsidies. Our members have developed what we call merchant projects without subsidy. What the government's now seeing, they're costing the consumer more than say, for example, in Great Britain, where they have these contracts with a fixed price. We're now actually seeing government going, can we get the legacy generators, those who are already built, onto these contracts to protect consumers from the variation in prices? So that's the way forward. That gives our members a guaranteed price, which then allows them to access cheaper finance. If you can go to a bank or an investor and say, we know we're going to get XP per megawatt hour for the next 15 years, that's very much a bankable project. If you're saying, look, the electricity price is high now, but it might dip, we don't know, it's vagaries of the market, there's bigger risk. The price of finance goes up, and the price goes up for the consumer. So it really is a kind of win-win for all round. And I suppose the good news, we're going to have a consultation on this either by the end of the year, start of next year, of introducing this to Northern Ireland. It should have been done many years ago, in my opinion, but it looks like we are going to do it now. So certainly encouraged by that, and I think you'll start to see the level of renewable build out ramp up as a result of that once it comes in. And I can't not bring politics into it, but we need an assembly, we need a government to bring in the legislation to underpin it. I've said for a long time, climate should be the priority. It absolutely must be now. And we need the assembly back up to get on with these things, and other issues can be resolved in other ways, but we need a functioning government to deliver.
Yeah, look, as I understand it, you're talking about these contracts for differences, and my understanding of them is that you agree a sort of strike price which the wind farm or the solar farm would be guaranteed to get. If the market price is below that, then it's made up to that price. On the other hand, if the market price is higher than the strike price, the wind farms, the solar farms would pay back. Now, we don't have that here yet. You're talking about it could be brought in. It obviously is to some extent in across the water in GB. Is there evidence that the wind farms and the solar farms or wherever, the renewables, are paying back when the price, and it obviously has gone above those strike prices? Is it working?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the first quarter of 2021. Colleagues in Renewable UK estimated the renewable generators paid back 160 million, essentially a subsidy from generator to consumer. That's, when the prices started to rise. That figure's only going to increase. I don't have sort of more up-to-date figures, but obviously with the market price having shot up, and that's essentially the way it works. If you get a lesser price, if the market dips like it did, for example, in 2020 during COVID, yes, the consumer kind of subsidizes you and pays you to make sure you get that price. But then when it increases like it has now, you pay back to the consumer. And there was a report done that over the life of the CFD, the Contracts for Difference scheme in Great Britain, that actually the generators net would pay back 1.5 billion across, I think it was across 20 years projection. So overall, this benefits the consumer, but as I say, it provides a protection for everyone that allows us to get, relatively cheap finance and secure investment. But as I say, provides a guarantee to the consumer, your prices aren't going to rocket up. Now, at the minute, it's a relatively small number of generators. If you take in all the gas generation and all the renewables that are on this system, government's current drive is now to get all renewable generators, or as many as possible, on the list system so that we can provide better protection for the consumer.
Mareanne, can I turn to you? What barriers do you see, whether they be in the shape of government or in attitudes in the public or attitudes maybe in your supplier? Do you see any significant barriers to you doing what you want to do or you think needs to be done, which is probably the same thing?
I certainly think cost, Jimmy, would be the key one, particularly in the environment we are in the minute. We certainly have seen our profit levels drop. And when you see the environment and the instability, I suppose, that's happening within the next couple of years, you have to sort of think, can I make that CapEx expenditure on renewables, or can my business survive with the cost? So it is looking at cost, and again, I suppose that barrier could be helped if there was a bit more government support, and that could negate that barrier. But for me, it will be cost and looking at CapEx at a time when there is so much uncertainty in the marketplace would be, for me, the biggest barrier.
Can you sort of maybe split those extra costs? To what extent is it to do with the price of electricity, for instance, and what is it how much is it to do with the price of the raw materials you're bringing in? Now, obviously you've got your solar panels, which are helping to defray those costs, but what's it mostly coming, or where are the biggest increases in costs coming from? What side of I'm not looking for exact numbers, but where are the biggest costs increases that you're seeing coming from?
They probably are coming from energy. Will be a big part. Material costs also for us are coming up, and as well as labour costs, because again, we're in a market where the cost of living has certainly gone higher, and people are looking for increased salaries. So there is a number of different costs affecting, but it certainly has affected our, I suppose, overhead rate when we do look at the costs. But possibly the biggest cost for us will be the energy and the materials.
Now, in regards to the materials, that to some extent was blamed on, as it were, the rush after, when COVID sort of subsided a little bit and the economies across the world began to get back to normal. Has that form of inflation subsided at all in materials? The bottlenecks, for instance, that were talked about, is there any evidence that that inflation is easing a little bit?
It certainly is even easing a little bit on sort of certain materials, but then there is other materials that are still certainly going up for us. It has eased. I suppose we were hit with Brexit, we were hit with COVID, and then we were hit with war in Ukraine. So again, lots of them affected our cost of our materials, particularly our raw materials like wood. There still is material costs. It has subsidised slightly, but there still is costs like metal and glass that are still rising. And it possibly is because their overhead costs are rising, that they have to put it on their products as well. We haven't seen just a total leveling off of material prices yet, but hopefully, fingers crossed soon.
Okay, Stephen, we know that Northern Ireland, in terms of renewables, has relied to a very significant extent on wind farms, lesser so on solar farms, but other types of technology haven't been investigated or to the same degree, or not maybe investigated, but they certainly haven't been developed to the same extent. Do you see a role for, geothermal, maybe using tidal, other forms of renewable energy that to this point have not been tapped into?
I think geothermal's almost certainly going to come forward. I think in the heating space where geothermal largely comes in, I think the picture's less clear. I mentioned the report we did that mapped out a zero carbon electricity system, and you can almost see what things will look like in, say, 2035, which would be our target to get to zero carbon electricity. I think there's a lot more, we have to try things. So I'm aware that the Department for Economy is supporting a number of geothermal trials. And I think we'll start to see those come forward over the next year or two. And I think that's what people need to almost see the technology at work, to work out the finances and see, is this something we can ramp out? Again, it's one of those things, again, when you see a map of Europe, it's similar with wind, and look at where the best geothermal resource is. Northern Ireland, actually, particularly I think around kind of North Antrim area, has fantastic geothermal potential. So it's just tapping into it, proving the technology, and working out the kind of finances of it. So I think that will come forward. Tidal, I would say the jury's still out a little bit. I mean, I know in Great Britain they're starting, so that contracts for different scheme I mentioned, they're starting to have a kind of dedicated pot for tidal. The problem that tidal has, even offshore wind now has come down to the price of onshore wind. At one stage it was 2-3 times more expensive. That's come right down and it's now competitive. Tidal is still approximately 4 times more expensive than onshore wind, partly I'm told because these things get absolutely battered under there, and there's a lot of repair, so that's part of the issue. We Strangford Lough, where we test a lot of these technologies, and that was some of the evidence that came out of that. So I think tidal, the advantage was always that it was predictable. Unlike wind and solar, you absolutely know the project 10 years forward what the tides will be. But with battery storage and potentially hydrogen, you potentially get that same backup generation that I talked about before, and hopefully at a lower cost. So as I say, we will see if the cost of tidal can come down. Then absolutely, it's another resource we can tap into. But I think it's a big if still at the minute.
Can you take out your crystal ball now? Because it's a key question. We've talked about this. It's a constant source of comment, and that is the price of energy right now. Now we're in extraordinary circumstances. Eventually, there will be peace in Ukraine. Eventually, things will turn to, if you like, a more normal level in relation to oil, gas, and indeed coal. That we shouldn't, we really need to phase that out as quickly as possible. But what I'm really asking you is, can you guarantee when things come back to normal, and we have installed lots more wind farms, probably onshore, offshore, maybe exploring some of the things you've just been talking about, that we're going to get a price for power that is similar to what we've enjoyed in the past before these recent increases? And is it going to be stable? Or are we going to see stable price? Because it's one thing to have a very low price and then people get used to it and then it shoots up and then people have cash flow problems. So what is your prediction in terms of what we might expect when we've got to 2030 and beyond, and you know there is a more normal situation in terms of the supply of the very limited, hopefully the very limited amount of fossil fuels that we're going to be using?
Yeah, look, there's plenty of evidence out there that renewables brings down the cost of electricity, and that's even outside of the current price hikes in terms of gas. But renewables is now, you know, if you're going to build a new power plant today, the cheapest one will be renewable electricity, whether offshore or onshore wind or solar. They're all competitive with each other at this stage. So that's the cheapest new electricity. Yes, we need investment in the grid, but again, the net benefit to consumers is there. Even when you make the investment, you're bringing consumer prices down. Whether or not we get stability will be to some extent up to the government. If you know there is a big push to get all generators onto a fixed price contract, then that will give the consumer the stability they need, and often it is stability as much as, if not more than, lower prices that people crave. You know, again, being able to predict what your electricity price will be for the year, particularly from a business point of view, being able to predict multiple years ahead, you know, gives you more certainty. So that will be a government policy choice to some extent. But as I say, what renewables will do is bring the overall price down. So, you know, and I suppose the frustration for me is we've had to, through necessity, we've had to make short-term decisions that are actually to some extent contrary to our long-term goals of decarbonisation. But, you know, I know when we talked before coming onto this call, you know, there was always the argument in terms of energy efficiency. You know, the single thing every home and business should do is invest in energy efficiency even before they get to renewables. And I say that as a renewables advocate. That in other countries has been incentivized by the government. We've always been told here it's too expensive. Had we done that, we could have been spending a lot less in this, you know, these current kind of price caps. You know, there's figures in the billions of pounds that the UK is spending. I've heard various reports, but they're certainly significant. Had we spent that kind of money in energy efficiency and anticipated, because this was always a risk, you know, okay, we couldn't have potentially predicted the war in Ukraine, but we did know we were reliant on foreign fuel, and we were spending, I think in Northern Ireland, 2 billion a year on fossil fuel imports. So had we invested before, you know, we could have saved ourselves money. Now we need to learn that lesson and start investing for the future.
Mareanne, we're coming to the end of the session, which I think has been very informative. I want you briefly to say, or to sum up if you like, the takeaways that you would like our listeners, our participants, to bring away with them, to encourage them to, you know, to go along the path that you've been following, if they're not already on it.
I would say take small incremental steps. Do what works for your business. Again, look at your business model and what cost you can put towards it. You know, don't be doing anything unrealistic. You don't have to do everything at the one time, but whatever works for your business, do that. We are finding certainly within our customers that a lot of them really are becoming more in line with what we do, sustainability. So have that in mind that, again, within your supply chain, people might be looking for the sustainability accreditations in the future. So if you start small now, you can build your way up to achieving the requirements for your customers. Stephen,
what would you like people to take away from this discussion?
There is a brighter future ahead if we all get behind it. You know, we need the support from government, we need the support from business, we need the support from communities. If we all act together, we can achieve our climate objectives, and it'll be good for the planet, but it'll also be good for us as consumers. So yeah, I think let's get behind that.
Okay, well, thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Mareanne. Indeed, thanks to Plan for organising us on behalf of Mid-Ulster Council. I think it's been a very useful discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you'll be able to join us next year. for another discussion about energy. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye, everyone.